Hi, I'm Jair Fory, the host of 4D Sports. My guest today is Dr. Linda Fory. She's a pediatrician from Kaiser Permanente in San Jose, California. We will be right back. Hi, Dr. Fory. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Yes, I know that you work at Kaiser Permanente. So one of the things that people want to know is what does it take really to become a doctor, all the way from going back to high school to college to all of these things?
Well, I'm a general pediatrician, and what that means is that I care for children from the moment they're born up through about 18 years of age. So I started out interested in science from a very young age. And from there, I took classes throughout my schooling in middle school, high school, that would help me continue my interest in science. I was a very good student in high school, and I became the valedictorian of my senior class of almost 1,000 students back in Los Angeles. So from there, I went to Stanford University, where I studied human biology. And I spent 4 years getting my undergraduate degree in that field. From there, I took a little bit of a turn because I didn't go directly into medical school after college. Instead, I worked a few years in cancer research. And at that point, I really thought that medicine was going to be the career for me for the long haul. So from there, I went back to school to make sure I really was well prepared in science. I spent 1.5 years taking additional science classes, biology, physics, 2 years of chemistry, and lots of laboratory classes. And from there, I was prepared to take the entrance exam for medical school. From that point, it was a 1-year application process with a series of essays and interviews and the like. And from there, I was luckily selected to go to my top choice of medical school. So I attended the University of California in San Francisco, and that's where I received my medical degree. After 4 years, I finished my medical degree, but at that point, I still was not ready to practice medicine. As medicine is a very complicated field, it takes not just years of schooling, but years of practice in order to be prepared to actually work and treat patients with some competency. Again, I took a little bit of a turn because I have many interests in science, and one of them is public health. And so I spent 1.5 years at UC Berkeley School of Public Health, where I studied epidemiology, and I earned a master's degree in epidemiology. At that point, I knew I wanted to be a pediatrician, and so I was really keenly interested in infant mortality and how our infant mortality rates are different between ethnic groups and around the world, and that was really a focus of interest for me while I was in grad school. So still, after high school, university, the medical school, and then yet a graduate degree, I still was not ready to practice medicine. So at that point, I needed to go and do what was called a residency. In order to become licensed to practice medicine, you need to pass board qualifying exams, part of which you need to spend at least 1 year doing practical medicine in a hospital in order to be able to qualify to become licensed in the state of California. As a pediatrician, the residency program lasts 3 years, and so after 3 years, I had my license to practice medicine, and I completed my 3-year term of practice in pediatrics.
Wow. And now that you have become a pediatrician, what is it that brings your attention? What is it that makes you the pediatrician that you are?
You know, pediatrics is great because I actually meet some of my patients for the first time at the moment that they're born. So I really get to see them grow up from their very, very first breath up until I can get to see them start to learn to walk and talk. And first they cry, and then after a while they say, "Hi, Dr. Fory," and that's really wonderful. That's really wonderful. So as the years go by, they're talking and they're walking and they're in school, they're developing more interest, and it really is a wonderful, wonderful thing to watch the kids grow up and try to help keep them healthy throughout their lives at all the different stages of their lives.
Well, it's interesting that you're talking about how you see the kids grow up and all of that, but there's something very interesting about you. I mean, and that's basically what makes all your many years of study so remarkable, because you were the first student at UCSF that was able to have babies, you know, and it's not just one, but two. So how do you handle all of that?
Yeah, that was part of the reason for some of my detours. I had two children when I was in medical school. My first after my first year, and my second sometime during my fourth year in medical school. So it did make studying a little bit more of a challenge, but I could actually see the pediatrics right there in front of me every day at home as well.
So so basically you were able to kind of practice a little bit.
Well, my children weren't my patients, but at the same time, the knowledge that I had from my being in school and having some knowledge of medicine and what's normal and not so normal about certain conditions in children, I think gave me a little bit of an edge as a mom.
So, well, as many of you know, this is a sports show, Dr. Fory. And the reason why we want to talk to you is because your background is so healthy with all the stuff that you have done. But also, we know that athletes, younger athletes, also, they need to go to the hospital sometime for injuries and all of these things. So, in your profession, what are the most common things that you see? I know that it could be seasonal, depending on the sports and all that, but what is the stuff that you usually get to see as a pediatrician?
Well, I think it also depends on the child's age. Usually when we're talking about kids playing sports, a little bit more competitive sports, we're talking about the later elementary up through high school ages. In those kids, I tend to see a lot of overuse injuries from kids who are competing or trying to a little bit too much, perhaps learn the wrong techniques and are overusing certain muscle groups and underusing others. And kids who have sustained injuries for other reasons, perhaps because they're participating in a contact sport.
See, speaking about the contact sports, I mean, we're dealing with now one of the great topics is the concussions in kids. Not just kids, but professional athletes, university athletes, and high school athletes. I mean, what are the things that, as a parent, we need to be aware of, or as a athlete, what is that we need to be aware of?
Well, I think that's a great question. I think all the media attention given to concussions is really important because it's heightened everyone's awareness of the importance of recognizing these things early. Unfortunately, brain injuries can be sustained, and the effects of those brain injuries from concussions can accumulate during the course of a season and during a young athlete's life. And at this point, what we feel is that the younger the brain, the more vulnerable they may be to some of these traumatic injuries. I think it's wonderful that there's great recognition now. I spend a great deal of time talking to all my athletes who are involved in contact sports about the importance not just of their parents and their coaches to recognize this, but they themselves realizing that certain symptoms are simply not normal and they need to speak up on behalf of themselves for their own health and for their own good and their safety.
Well, I think that when we're talking about injuries in kids and I think the parents need to be responsible, the athletic directors in these high schools, the medical personnel in these high schools, and all throughout, because I mean, we're dealing with young kids that will be affected by a particular injury.
Yes, but even before high school, I think the important thing is you may have 2 football players or maybe two soccer players or even basketball players who are involved into a collision, and a child goes down very hard and is dizzy and is, you know, seeing stars and perhaps even has some black spots in front of their eyes. And because they're so eager to play and they really want to do this, both for their team and because they enjoy their sport so much, they downplay that they have symptoms at all. And that puts them at higher risk for having even more serious injuries, both during that game and throughout their season.
Well, in the case of football, I mean, even though that the athletes wear helmets and pads, I mean, that hopefully will be able to help them out a little bit. But in the sports like basketball or soccer, I mean, where you have just contact, I mean, what could somebody do to prevent this type of situations from happening?
Well, in respect to football, I think that even the helmet is not necessarily even enough. And I think it gives some players a false sense of security of their degree of safety that may have with certain types of collisions and certain types of tackles. So I don't think a helmet is really the key. I don't think we can start putting helmets on every athlete, football, you know, soccer players and basketball players, and you can imagine gymnasts and the like, just in case they fall. It's just not a practical thing to do. Again, I think it's an awareness, proper teaching of techniques, and the awareness on both the part of the athlete, the parents, and all the adults that are involved with that child's participation in sports. It's going to lead to more safety.
Yeah, I think that this is something where everybody has to be involved to protect the well-being of the next generation of kids, basically. Early on, you were talking about repetitive injuries. So why do you think that that's happening? Are we as parents, are we pushing our kids a little bit too much? Are the coaches implementing longer and longer hours of training? What do you think that should be? That is the reason of this.
Again, that's something that's very sports specific. For a tennis player, they may have issues with their shoulders, with their elbows. Baseball players often with shoulders and elbows. Soccer players tend to have more issues with ankles and knees. It really depends on the sport. It depends on the type of motion, how often these motions are being repeated, whether there is force and trauma applied to a particular joint, such as in a sport like football, where the injuries may be very different than something where the arm is used in a very different manner, such as in baseball, where there isn't as much trauma, but there is a lot of repetition and there's a lot of stress put on growing joints. So for children, the issues with repetitive injuries have to do with the fact that the bones are not fully developed, the tendons are not fully developed, the musculature is not fully developed, and because of that, their joints are a little bit more vulnerable to damage. I think that some children are not being taught proper techniques, and again, with the eagerness of many children have of wanting to excel in a particular sport, and unfortunately sometimes with pressure from families, they're doing a little bit too much, a little bit too soon. The specialization in one single sport also can lead to repetitive injuries. For example, a child that plays baseball year-round, that pitches year-round, is going to end up with problems with their shoulders, especially and their elbows, because the joint from the constant throwing and throwing and throwing is putting a lot of stress on that growing arm.
No, I think that you're making some great points over there. I mean, but I think that one of the things that I guess we might need to do a little bit more of is coaching education. We need to make sure that those people that are in charge of these programs have the right information so they can pass the knowledge onto the kids properly.
Yeah. For kids who love sports and love to be active, one of the best things they can do is actually cross-training by doing other sports throughout the year. not just specializing in one sport all year, instead of just doing baseball, but maybe trying baseball, maybe a little basketball, maybe, something else that they enjoy doing where that arm can get a break so that they can be out with a team, doing a sport, getting lots of fresh air and activity, but not necessarily stressing the same muscle groups and joints over and over and over again. And that's a great way for kids to be able to, continue to be active. Yeah, that's what I recommend.
Yeah, I know that in your practice also, because the sports are seasonable, by seasons. So what is it that you do in terms of when a kid goes into your practice for a physical? What are the things that you are looking at?
So we have what's called a pre-participation sports physical that all high schools require, and some of the competitive athletic programs that are not necessarily associated with a school program also require. This consists of two parts. One part, which I think is the most important part, is actually the questionnaire that we offer. And what the questionnaire does is talk about, gets to the root of perhaps past injuries, past medical problems, and also talks about family history. We want to be able to identify a child who perhaps is at risk for having a life-threatening event while on a field or in a court.
So what would you,
in addition to that, we do a physical exam, hoping to make sure that everything is working fine. So it's not just making sure the heart and lungs are working fine, but all the joints as well.
So what would you say to a kid that is coming to you, after the physical, after having played a few games, and is coming with an injury, and you have to say to this kid, excuse me, but you cannot play on the next game. How are these kids taking it?
It depends on the child, and depends on their injury. And I think a lot of the kids come to me because they've been hurting a long time, and they know that something doesn't feel right, and that the pain that they're experiencing is not the typical soreness that they have from training. And so they already have a sense that there's something that's kind of wrong. It's disappointing. I think it's as disappointing for the child as the parents sometimes. But in order for the injury to heal, the rest is a very important component of that. And so I tried to put it in the perspective. We might miss a game or two or three, but when we return, we'll be able to return feeling good and pain-free, so you'll be able to compete the way you like, and compete at the level that you were accustomed to. We'll get back there gradually after you're pain-free. On the other hand, if you continue to work through this injury and you're having this severe pain, the pain is not going to go away. It may get worse. You may cause more damage than what you already have inside that particular area that's painful to you now, and your game is not going to be its best.
But Dr. Fory, my team needs me. I have to play tomorrow. What am I going to do? Release me, Dr. Fory. Do you get those type of situations?
Yeah, sometimes I do. And again, it's about having an honest discussion with the athlete and their parent about what's most important. And my perspective as their physician is their long-term health.
So how important is nutrition?
It's important. It's important, and I think it's something that's underestimated by both parents and athletes. I see too many athletes, especially high school athletes, that skip breakfast because they're rushing out the house, and skip lunch because they don't like it. The school lunch isn't good. They don't want to bring anything from home. And then comes practice after school. Well, they haven't had anything to eat or drink all day, and then they're wondering why, they feel slow, why they're sluggish, why, they're not playing as strong as they used to, during the summer or at another time of the year. Well, part of that answer is that the body needs fuel all the time. It needs fuel in the morning, afternoon, evening. It's like you have a car that's running on empty. You can only go on empty so long before you run out of gas. And so for those athletes who are not eating a nice, well-balanced diet and not hydrating throughout the day, when it comes to practice and games, especially in the later part of the day, they're already out of fuel. They're already on empty on those fumes when it's the most important time for them to be able to feel their best.
You're talking about drinking. How important is drinking then? Because I mean, what is it that we sometimes when we go to events, sport events for kids, you see the kid just drinking Pepsi or sodas or whatever. Is that the right type of thing that they need to be thinking about it? Or other people that just maybe want to drink juices with a lot of sugars in it. So what can you tell those kids?
Well, soda is not something that's ever needed by anyone. Soda has an incredible amount of sugar, some 20 teaspoons of sugar in one can. And that's not really what athletes need to keep their bodies healthy during competition. Instead, what they need is water, okay? Even those sports drinks that are like all those sports drinks that are sweetened with sugar have very little place for the majority of athletes in competition. There are some sports where having a drink with some electrolytes and sugar may be of use, such as for certain distance runners and perhaps where you're running for sustained periods of time, perhaps during a long soccer match or during a long bicycling event. For those kids, there may be some benefit in having some of an electrolyte sugar-sweetened beverage, but the majority of the drink you should have, the majority of the fluid, at least by 2 to 1 should be water, even for those children and athletes who are participating in those more endurance-like sports.
And what are electrolytes?
Electrolytes are salt, potassium, and the like. We get plenty of it in our diet, and so in general they don't need to be replaced. Most of us have more than enough salt and more than enough potassium from just eating regular food, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. There's salt in virtually everything we eat, as well as potassium in most fruits and vegetables, so there's no need to have to feel like you need to take special supplements in that regard. Again, the water is the thing that the body usually needs and lacks, especially when there's a very grueling training or competitive environment.
So what other things, I mean, you can, based on what you have seen, you can tell us in terms of athletes, the kids that are playing a sport that they are dealing with, in terms of not just necessarily the injuries, but what about obesity in sports? Is that something that you deal with, or is that something that you?
Well, what I like to encourage kids of all sizes to participate in activity. Mm-hmm. I think that for some sports, there is a little bit too much emphasis on weight, which can be unhealthy. It seems that, some sports, there's an advantage in being heavier or bigger, such as football. There's other sports where there seems to be a little bit of advantage of being lighter, or they measure your classifications in sports like wrestling, where you have to meet certain weight goals in order to compete at a certain level, and when you don't maintain a certain weight, then it becomes a lot more challenging for you as an athlete to compete in a heavier weight class. So there are lots of different challenges in terms of too much weight, too little weight that athletes face. I try to help children realize and their families realize what is the proper size for their height, their age, what the expectations are, and what the goals should be in terms of nutrition and activity to maintain a healthy size for themselves. And that changes with time because children are growing. And so the weight goals and the diet needs and the nutrition needs are going to change as the child ages.
As the child ages. I mean, all of this thing is nice, and I mean, the information that you're giving is very, very interesting and valuable. In terms of parents, what is it that parents need to really do to ensure that their kids are doing the right things?
Okay. Well, I think sports should be fun. And I think most kids, virtually every kid, loves being active in one way, shape, or form. Not every child wants to be an Olympian. Not every child wants to be a professional athlete, nor should they be, because that's something that only a very, very select few are going to be able to do realistically in the future. However, every child can enjoy activity. I think it's a matter of finding the right activity for that child and for that family. I encourage all children, all ages, to become active. So as one of the things I talk about at virtually every visit, what kinds of things do you enjoy doing? What kinds of active things do you enjoy doing? And for those who don't think that something like a team sport like soccer or basketball is for them, maybe they would like doing one of those individual sports. Maybe they would enjoy just going outside, going hiking. Maybe they would enjoy going for runs. Maybe they could discover maybe one of the martial arts, which is a little bit more individualized, or skating, or something else. Not every child thrives in a team sport environment, but usually there's some type of activity that a child will enjoy.
Well, I mean, this is what is interesting for me, because I mean, when we were growing up, we were able to do sports. We were able to jump and run, whatever, without any assistance from anybody, really. Our parents, most of the time, the parents didn't even know that we were playing on the soccer field someplace. Yeah, but to me, it seems like we are over-specializing our kids too early. And I think that out of that, maybe that's where we see some of the problems that you deal with over there in pediatrics.
Yes, again, children, I don't think necessarily need to be in an organized sport, but they should have some activity they enjoy. So things like, going bicycling, or, just spending a day in a park is a nice way of being active without necessarily being in an organized sport activity. So yeah, in the past, yeah, I used to play outside all day too, and I used to go up and down the street with the neighbor kids, but nowadays in the 2010, 2012, that isn't quite so common. A lot of families live in apartments. Some areas are not so safe. And we need to keep a little closer track of where our children are, because it's not like it was in decades past.
Thank you for watching.